Man, Julia, did we have high hopes for Canada? I feel like a lot of Canadians did nationwide, around the world, that support this women's program. And I'd say a little bit of an upset, them finishing third in the group of death, aka Group B, a 4-0 loss today to a co host nation, Australia. What are your thoughts on the score line? Were you shocked to see Canada lose this game 4-0?
Oh man, you're so right, Caroline. It is a heartbreaking moment, not just for these Canadian players on the pitch, but like you mentioned, fans watching worldwide. I know Sophie Schmidt after the game, she was saying she thought the team let their fans down all across the country. And it's just so tough to hear that. But as for the scoreline, I was certainly shocked with a 4-0 result. I did not think that it was going to be that much of a, I'm not going to say the word blowout, but like 4 goals is quite a lot. I thought it would be a lot closer. I thought Canada would have come out with a little bit more energy. And unfortunately, they did not, albeit Australia on home soil. Huge moment for them. Their fans probably acted as the 12th man out there, but I know this Canadian team will be very disappointed with themselves. And we all thought they were going to make a deeper run, but let's hope they can regroup for the Paris Olympics next year. And I think we'll just have to see how they respond.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I even think that scoreline could have been 6-0, and that hurts me to say because as a former player in the program and someone who's been to a Junior World Cup and someone who's born in Canada,
Mhm.
I root for this team with my whole heart and soul. Today, waking up at 3:30 in the morning, it didn't even bother me. I'm like, you know what? I felt like my team was playing, and I'm so proud, regardless of the scoreline. I'm proud of these ladies. I'm proud of what they achieve every single time they go
Mhm.
onto the pitch. But today, unfortunately, just the way you have to say it is it wasn't their best day. Again, I think the scoreline could have been 6-0. I think that the Fowler goal that was called back for it being offside was a bad decision. I think that
Mhm.
goal should have counted. Fowler then hit the post, later on in the game. This game could have been even at a higher score. And I'm just disappointed in the sense that Canada has so much talent. They have so much to offer in this sport that I think that performance didn't reflect that at all. And it's their first, World Cup group stage exit since 2011. So you feel in the sense maybe they took a couple of steps backwards, but I'm not worried too much long term. I think that they need to regroup. I think Bev Priestman has some things she needs to work out because in September they have some important qualifying matches where they're going to really need to reorganize and figure out the identity of this team. But for this match today, I think completely outplayed, completely out hustled. It just wasn't the same team that I'm usually used to seeing. So, and these
Mhm.
things happen. It's just unfortunate that it happened in such an important game and at the World Cup for Canada.
Exactly. And I mean, Priestman, after the match and her post match presser, I was watching that and she was saying, unfortunately, obviously, it sucks how they bowed out of this tournament, but that's the game of football. This is exactly what happens. And it matters how you respond and come back to it. Albeit, like you said, very, very proud of this Canadian team. They've been going through a lot, both on and off the pitch. And I've been trying to sort of unpack what happened this game for the Canadians. Was it just Australia coming out with so much fire and this just general feeling of being outplayed, or was there something else happening? And I think something that's really important to note is just between their second and third group stage games, Canada reached a semi agreement with their federation. Now, it wasn't what they were looking for at all. So, of course, that's really frustrating. And I've seen on social today, a lot of people are sort of saying that, hey, Canada Soccer, this team needs more training, more resources. This is totally mentally draining them. And I think Canada, they looked a little bit drained out there. So you can't help but wonder, is it anything to do with this background issue that's constantly being going on, or is it something within the team, or just a bad day? Who knows? But I would just love to see these girls pick themselves up and be proud for what they've accomplished, because I know so many young women and men too are watching across this country, and so many people are behind them.
Yeah, you and I both we hope that they pick themselves up, and you can't be too hard on yourselves. I was speaking with Andy Petrill this morning on CBC Sports, and I said, you see this in men's football, you see this in women's football. Some of the
Mhm.
best teams in the world don't get out of the group stage. Now, do they have a lot of work to kind of assess what happened afterwards? Absolutely. Does Canada have a lot of time to kind of figure things out? Not really.
Mhm.
But sometimes these little wake up calls need to happen. And, that's what I think happened to Canada here today. Australia on the flip side, because I have to give
Mhm.
Australia a lot of love. This was their biggest World Cup win in their country's history for the women's side. They have never topped a group in women's World Cup history, so they've now done that.
Mhm.
You would think going into this match, Canada had destiny in their hands and they just weren't able to figure it out after the 90 minutes. But Australia on the flip, just how dangerous they were, how they passed the ball, how they exposed Canada on the flanks, how they took advantage of, unmarked players or players that weren't pressed quickly enough to. They overall, from start to finish, I think controlled that entire game. And Canada was playing catch up, unfortunately, from a Canadian perspective. But, you got Haley Rasso, who scores within the first 10 minutes of the game. She scores 2 goals in that game. I mentioned her in Australia's opening game against Ireland, how impactful she was and how much I enjoyed her matchup with McCabe. And every single game, she just continues to impress me more and more. And she's a player for me that's a star player that no team can leave unmarked or give her time on the ball. And unfortunately, Canada made that mistake today, and she capitalized on 2 opportunities. And a lot of lessons learned for Canada, and
Mhm.
for Australia, a massive win that they now need to kind of digest, celebrate, and then now figure out how they're going to progress now into the round of 16 and continue this in front of their home fans.
Absolutely. And I mean, Australia did this all without their star striker, Sam Kerr, as well. So
Yeah.
major kudos to them. Who knows really what Sam's is like going into the knockouts? I know she was fit to play today, albeit with a little bit of question marks. So we'll see what happens. But this Australian team really does deserve a lot of credit. For sure. But Haley Rasso, she is so clinical. She is so hungry. And I just loved how confident this Australian team looked out there. I mean, they were on home soil, of course, but they really did look at home. And I think something to note as well is, Rasso's history. I obviously love her being a Manchester City ex-player. I was very sad when she moved to Real Madrid, but only a few years ago, she was in the hospital, fractured 3 vertebrae, and was told she genuinely might never walk again. But here she is in front of her family, her friends, her fans, scoring a brace. What an amazing moment for her. Agreed with you about lots of lessons to learn for Canada, but I think our Canadian girls, they're hungry too. They want to go out there. They're going to know they have things to work on. So I'm not worried at all.
What's one thing in the game for Canada, Julia, that you think they struggled with or that you'd like to see them improve on with their games coming up in September?
That's a great question. I think there's a few different things. First of all, I just want to see them bring back their usual confidence. Didn't really see that as much as I would have liked this tournament. So I think going in there with the confidence on the ball would be fabulous. But like we've talked about a little bit, Caroline, on our podcasts, is this idea of having a playmaking midfield. I think would be fabulous. So again, getting the ball more to players like Julia Grosso, Jessie Fleming. I think they were really hurting on transition to attack and then actually being clinical in the final third of the pitch. So I would love to see a little bit more work on that, maybe a little bit more work with set plays. But I think resetting, focusing on how they're going to get the ball in the net, quite honestly.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I was speaking to Andy Petrillo about this morning was, as a former midfielder, I'm always looking at the midfield. And I think that Jessie Fleming is one of the best in the world at what she does. And I think that we didn't utilize Jessie Fleming nearly enough today. Getting the ball to Julia Grosso to connect with that top line, threading that needle, breaking up Australia's back line, it wasn't done nearly enough. And again, I really hit home on this against Ireland, especially in the first half. I don't like direct football. I think sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes that's the game plan. But when that's the way that the majority of your passes are going just over the top with no intent, no direct contact with a player, it's not going to work. And I feel like Canada wasted a lot of passes today when you have a Jessie Fleming and a Julia Grosso, at least in the first half, that are able to be nifty and crafty and have such a high football IQ. We didn't utilize our midfield nearly enough today. And when we had the ball, it was too direct and a lot of giveaways, and it was messy. And unfortunately for me, the midfield battle needed to be a little bit better. And that's not all on the midfielders. I'm saying that we have the tools. We have these very, very good players, but if we're not using the tools properly, we're basically eliminating these dangerous opportunities that we could get. In that, I also think that we need to be creating way more chances from distance. I want to say we didn't really get many shots on target from distance. I think Canada finished the game with 3 shots on target. I said after the Ireland game, Jordan Heidema had a couple chances on net, and I wanted to continue to see her doing that. So, and that's not all on Jordan Heidema. That's something that any player on the pitch can do. But there just wasn't enough dangerous opportunities for Canada. I think that can be fixed, but Bev Priestman needs to go back to the drawing board and find a way to make Jessie Fleming, our quarterback of this Canadian team, one of the best midfielders in the world, see more of the ball, because when she has the ball, she can make dangerous things happen and link with players like Julia Grosso to connect through that back line and create more opportunities for Canada. So that's how I feel. I'm really looking forward to see how they're able to kind of progress on that in September. And like I said, these things happen. I mean, I'm not sitting here and I feel bad that Sophie Schmidt said that at the end of the game, because I'm not sitting here thinking that Canada let me down. Of course, was it a disappointing performance? Sure, but we can say that as football fans across our entire lifetime with our favorite teams, right? Like, we've all had disappointing performances of our favorite teams, but by no means do I think I've been let down by Team Canada, and I'm always rooting for these women, and I do think that they have the ability to grow from this experience, and sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need that, and I'm excited to see what they do in September.
Exactly. And I think a lot of these Canadian fans around the world, maybe it's important to show support for this team, to tweet something, Instagram, send a letter. I don't know. I send letters. I'm still an old school girl. But Sophie, she must just be heartbroken. That was her last match ever in a Canadian shirt. But it's such a good point to say. We've all experienced the wins, the losses, the ups, the downs with the sport. That's all part of it. But what makes this Canadian community so strong is that we all stick together. And I think that's so beautiful. But moving forward as well, too, Canada, I noticed they had just slightly more possession than Australia, if I have that stat correct. But I think it's this idea, Caroline, you're mentioning about, possession, you have the ball, but what do you actually do with that possession? That possession doesn't mean anything if you're soaring balls in without a purpose. If you're not sure what your play is going to be, if you don't have the vision to move it forward, I agree. I think those are things that can absolutely 100% be worked on and can be fixed. And I'm really excited to see them come out later in the year and just bring it to town,
Do you think Christine Sinclair retires, or do you think we still have some Canadian games left in her?
I think we'll have her for the Olympics. I'm going to call it that. We'll have her for the Paris 2024 Olympics, and maybe she'll retire after that. I think she'll want a little bit more of a redemption arc, to be quite honest. I don't think she's quite done yet, but we'll see. Who knows with her? A lot of people thought she might have retired, I guess, earlier than what she has, but I think she did still have some great moments this World Cup, and I would have loved her to score a goal in her 6th, of course, but fortunately it wasn't meant to be. But I think she'll have a little bit left in the tank for sure.
Well, listen, I think whether she's on the pitch or off the pitch, if she's coming off the bench onto the pitch, she is super valuable to this Canadian team. A legend, not only within women's football, but football overall. Highest international goal scorer. That's a record above Messi and Ronaldo, for those who don't know. And she just brings so much to this game and so much to this team. She's just, her experience and everything she's done for the sport. I love to see her within this program. And it'll be a very, very sad day when she retires from international football. On the flip side, I do think Bev Priestman needs to start identifying what this team looks like with the potential of Christine Sinclair retiring, because that's obviously going to happen I don't know when, but at some point it will, because Sinclair's, I don't know if she's approaching 40 years old or if she is 40 years old, but that's a reality that Canada will have to face. So what does this team look like? What does their identity look like without Sinclair? And who's that player who steps up? Who are the few young players who step up? And who are those players that are go-to players that when, we're down 2-0 at halftime to Australia, that they are the spark to this team, because we lack that today as a Canadian program. There was no spark. There was no leader on the field at some point. And I think that's kind of where it went downhill for Canada. So I would hate to see Christine Sinclair retire. She's an icon in this country. She's an icon in football. But the reality is at some point she will retire. So what does this identity look like for Canada when that day comes?
Yeah, this team certainly does need to evolve. Of course, losing Schmidt, that was huge. She came on and was big in the Ireland game. So that was the spark gone. Of course, she, didn't make it happen today, unfortunately, but it is what it is. And it's this question again of, like you said, who are these young players stepping up? Who's going to start? I love that Jessie Fleming's going to get the armband. I think she'll do a fabulous job as captain moving forward. But when it comes to the other players, I know we're on the Julia Grosso bandwagon. I love her. I think she'll be great. But it was also really nice to see Olivia Smith come in there today. She's very young. She will be huge for the future. Just signed with Sporting. So that's no feat for an 18-year-old. That's pretty amazing. But who are some of maybe your top picks, Caroline? I know we've talked about Julia Grosso. I would love to see Jordan Heidema get some goals in there. But who do you think is going to step up?
I said this again this morning. I'd love to see Shelina Zadorsky back on the field. I think she's a natural leader. I can't wait to see her back. Again, I'm not sure if she didn't come on at this World Cup as much as she usually does because of that illness she faced earlier in the year. But I'd love to see her get some minutes because she's such a natural born leader, in my opinion. And I want Jessie Fleming to shine because her role is so important to this team. I think Janine Becky, when she's back, absolutely has that potential. I think we really missed her. And Adriana Leon, I think that Adriana Leon and then Jordan Heidema on the other side, these are two players that are very powerful, very crafty. We need to see them now kind of in their element and execute on the skill level that they have. So again, this is a job for Bev Priestman to now, the point of the managers to bring out the best of every single player on the pitch, every single bench player, every player coming onto the pitch, and what is the best position for them? What is the best tactic for them to excel at? So Bev Priestman has, some work to do in the sense that there are some really, really talented players on this roster. How do we now have the tools? How do we use the tools effectively to win these big games?
Yeah, that's a great answer, honestly. And I love what you mentioned about Janine Becky, too. I think we really miss Janine. I love speaking with her. And, players like Desiree Scott as well. You can totally see their influence on the pitch for sure. But even in other facets, Janine, I find, is somebody who really knows how to go in there and just lift people up, lift the spirits up. And I think that was also something that was hurting today, in addition to, of course, some of her excellent abilities to cross the ball in and all that good stuff. But it'll be interesting once some of these players are back. But at the end of the day, ACL's no small joke.
Yeah.
When Janine comes back from that injury, will she be the same player? Obviously, I hope so. But you can't guarantee that either. You can't bank on her coming back being the exact same. It might take her a little bit of time to even get back into the groove. So I think, like you mentioned, it's about figuring out the best positions for people without banking on some of these players we have in the past, like Sinclair, even Becky. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, a sad day for Canadian football fans because we would love to see this Canadian team make waves at this World Cup, just like we saw them make at the last Olympic Games when they won gold. But these things happen. I'm going to reiterate that one more time. In men's and women's football, some of the best teams in the world don't get out of the group stage. It's very unfortunate for Canada. I'm sure they're having a hard time digesting this scenario, but at the same time, a couple international games coming up here in the fall, and it's time to rebound. It's time to bounce back. It's time for that wake-up call, shake it off, and get back to business. So I'm going to say, as a Canadian, I don't feel let down. I'm always cheering these women on, and an unfortunate game, not their best performance. You can say disappointing, but the life goes on. That's football.
Exactly. And I mean, again, I just have such this feeling of, I guess, joy being a woman in sport and seeing them up on the world stage doing their best, fighting for equality, fighting to be the best people and players they can be. And I think they probably got a little bit of unfair social media hate,
Yeah.
to be honest. It was pretty depressing logging on to Twitter, or I guess X now. I'm not even sure what it's called. But, you know, and seeing just so many, I think it was people's emotions maybe playing into things. But I think a lot of things were forgotten today, that they still went out there, they did their best, they represented on the world stage. That's really hard to do against a strong team at home when all the fans were rooting for Australia, you know, and I just think they were maybe a little bit unfairly attacked, but that's the name of the social game.
Yeah, it is. And just before we move on to our next topic, I want to give a massive shout out to Australia because they're making a lot of World Cup history for their women's program. And I love to see it. They have a lot of talented players on their roster. Catley finishing off a second penalty of the World Cup. It's not an easy thing to do. You know, just a lot of leadership on that team, a lot of heart. And they improved on that second World Cup group stage game that they had. For them to just kind of come out against Canada today and handle their business, you have to give them massive, massive respect. And in my opinion, today, the better team won.